En el centro de la pampa vive un pimiento. Sol y viento pa' su vida, sol y viento.
Hello, I am Patrick Barnard. Welcome to the 36th edition of the Pimento Report. Today we have a special Pimento. We're going to listen to the words of a very unusual man. He's Montreal's man of bridges, Professor Saeed Mirza from the engineering faculty of McGill University. And in fact, he's in a front page story today. It is June 30th, 2011. You can hear all the work that's going around here. I'm standing in front of historic Westmont Park United Church, and I'm holding the Gazette for today, and it is Thursday, June 30th, 2011. And here's the front page story, which actually concerns Dr. Mirza. I'm going to read the headline. We asked for the inspection report, it says. The story is by the very excellent transport specialist on the Montreal Gazette, Mr. Andy Riga. Let's read this front page banner story. We asked for the inspection report for the Mercier Bridge. Quebec's transport minister said no. Quote, "What's most important is to know that we are doing the job. We are repairing if we need repairs. If I were to give any technical reports, you would not understand maybe half of that." Now, let's get on with this story of Professor Mirza and bridges. What you are seeing here is an extraordinary home movie film of an amazing event. It was the collapse of the Tacoma Narrows Suspension Bridge in Washington State on November 7th, 1940. This event was extraordinary, but also illustrative. The Tacoma Bridge was long, but not wide and not thick. A wind combined with the poor aerodynamics of the girder work created a harmonic resonance with the deck of the bridge, which you can see here, oscillating in a periodic wave until the bridge collapsed through its own excitation. Montreal is an island of bridges with every type except a suspension bridge. But two of Montreal's bridges, the Mercier and the Champlain, are in bad shape because of corrosion and issues of inspection and maintenance. A modern bridge is an equilibrium of external and internal forces, and disequilibrium makes it into a moving mechanism which in the worst case collapses. The Tacoma Bridge shows how the dynamics of any bridge can become unstable and, in the very worst instance, can lead to collapse. When did you first develop your interest in bridges?
Well, my interest in bridges goes way back. See, both my grandfathers were civil engineers, and they were involved in construction of bridges. My father was a civil engineer, and he was involved at first with the railways. And we were living way outside a city in a tent. I think I must be just about 3 years old, and he would take me and my younger brother to the site with him, and we were just fascinating with the railways. And I guess that's when the idea of being an engineer germinated in me. But I had also known about my grandfathers because both of them had been rewarded by the British for their work on bridges in Punjab and elsewhere. That you know, they were given land, agricultural land, as a reward in some parts of Punjab. So I know that they must have done quite well.
That bridge that you saw when you were 3 years old, where is that, just out of curiosity, and is it still standing?
Yes, you know, I haven't seen it in many years, but I know that it is still standing. This one bridge would be over the river Satluj in Punjab.
Bridges are very old. When you teach your students about the origin of bridges, what do you tell them?
Well, you know, I guess, you know, you just try to look at the history briefly. How did an arch evolve? And I guess the example here is that, you know, some pieces of rock slid down a mountain and filled a valley with, you know, a space underneath, so it forms a natural arch with the loads being transmitted by compression. And then you go back and say, all right, you know, in the old days, the monkeys used to travel by these, what do you call it, the vines on the tree. And if you just tie two of them together, it just becomes basically a form of a suspension bridge. And then there are examples from China and northern India where pedestrian bridges were first developed, and using rope and wood, and on it goes. I give a graduate course on bridge engineering. In addition, I give another graduate course in concrete design, which again can be used for bridges. But at the undergraduate level, I have dealt with renovation and preservation of infrastructure, and bridges do come in. And I used to take my classes to look at the overpasses and bridges around Montreal, just to show them what a bridge, of course, looked like, but at the same time, what kind of deterioration has taken place in our bridges and why. And just to enable them to distinguish the different modes of deterioration.
Was the collapse of the Concorde overpass a tremendous wake-up call for this province and this city?
It certainly was. You see, the reason why the La Concorde overpass collapsed is not directly related to what is happening to our bridges. But in this case, it was just some steel that had not been placed properly, and what is very surprising is it lasted that long. Normally, if there are serious flaws in the placement of steel, as soon as you remove the formwork, the bridge gives.
Was that structural fault that was there from the beginning the result of hasty construction?
Yeah, somebody sort of made a mistake in placing the steel, and these are common sense rules, that if I need to transfer load from this steel to the lower steel, I must place it on top, not at the bottom. So, some simple things were missed, and I guess it transferred the load for a long time. And suddenly, if some minor cracks appear, of course, unfortunately, moisture gets in, we go through freezing and thawing cycles, water expands into ice, increase the volume, just pries it open. And that's what happened over the years, and finally, of course, it just gave way.
How many bridges do we have that are in trouble now? Which ones are they, and what's the diagnosis, Doctor?
Well, amongst the bridges that are in trouble, of course, Mercier Bridge has been the older part of the bridge, built in 1934, has been closed, and the reason is. If you just look at the photographs from last January, you see extensive corrosion on different parts. And of course, the gusset plates which connect the different members, they are extensively corroded, and the loads moves through them. And they should have realized perhaps a few years ago, because the corrosion doesn't occur overnight, it occurs gradually. And at some stage, they should have realized that, hey, look, these are not strong enough to take the loads of the trucks and everything that is passing over the bridge.
Now, those plates are fundamental to the structure of the bridge, aren't they?
They are, absolutely, because they are, these gusset plates are, you see the members there, these sloping members that are coming in, the members at the bottom, members at the top, so these are all connected to each other by means of these gusset plates, and therefore it is needed for the integrity of the entire system. See this one here, that sort of irregular shape polygon out here, where this diagonal member, vertical member, that diagonal member, these horizontal members come and meet, that is the gusset plate.
I'm going to point, you mean that thing right there?
Yeah, that thing right there, that's the gusset plate.
Okay. Are they made out of steel?
They are made out of steel, and they are sort of not as sort of robust as the members themselves, but it should be thick enough so that when the member brings the load, that load can be transmitted through the gusset plate. And the gusset plate must be able to sort of take all of these loads.
On the Mercier Bridge, were those plates properly inspected over the last decade?
This I don't know, because I'm not privy to the inspection records, but as I said earlier, these plates would deteriorate because of corrosion gradually over a period of time. And if you're inspecting it, one should be able to find out as to how the plate is losing its thickness and therefore its strength, and preventive measures should have been taken earlier on, but in this case remedial measures should have been taken. This inspection is extremely important. The ministry might have the checklist, but I feel that they missed out on finding out a few things, and they should have raised this red flag long ago. They should have attended to the gusset plates and other corroded members maybe 10 years earlier or 20 years earlier, because they must have seen this corrosion occurring.
The other major bridge in Montreal that is in trouble right now is the Champlain Bridge. It carries more traffic than any other bridge in Canada. It has a couple of problems. One of them focuses on a small number of dowels or pins that are there in the structure. And a second, a more significant problem, I think, has to do with the very structure of the bridge itself.
The Champlain Bridge is another problem. See, when it was designed, of course the design in itself is very unusual. I like to recommend designs to be built which promote easy inspection, easy maintenance, and therefore, you know, your bridge would have a longer life. But in case of Champlain Bridge, what was done was there are 7 girders with flanges on top. You know, these are projecting members. 7 of them put together, and the space in between was sort of filled with concrete cast in place, and the whole thing was post-tensioned together. That means held together, and consequently that becomes one integral unit. And unfortunately, the end girders, because of poor drainage over the bridge, your snow melt and salt flowed over the external girders, and consequently the chlorides went in, and they cause corrosion of the pre-stressing steel in them. Now, these girders had therefore weakened considerably. They realized that. They inspected it, they found it, and of course the remedy was to put extra steel on the outside.
The concrete that was used there is also important structurally, and concrete is very vulnerable in a climate like Montreal. Is the concrete in the Champlain Bridge a problem as well?
I would think it is. You know, it was built in the late 50s, early 60s. And see, our focus these days is on the strength of concrete. If you look at any contract specifications, the drawings, they'll be listed. The concrete shall have a strength of, let's say, 30 megapascals or 40 megapascals at 28 days. Now, that concrete may have the strength, but at the same time, the internal structure of the concrete could be such that it is permeable. So it can be strong but still permeable, and the result is that permeability allows the aggressive elements to come in. These would be chlorides in our case, and in case of, let's say, some polluted cities, these might be carbon dioxide. So both of them get into the concrete and cause corrosion of the reinforcement.
There have been 2 great periods or intense periods of bridge building here. The 19th century and in the 1960s, and the other period, of course, a couple of very important bridges built in the 1930s. It's as if these bridges come in waves, and now we seem to be in a period that is actually your specialty, a time when we have to reconstruct our bridges. Am I right?
Well, you know, unfortunately, what has happened is what in the 1950s and 60s, there was sort of expansion of infrastructure. We had Expo 67 here in Montreal, and the result was that we built highways and bridges in large numbers, and the quality control wasn't there. And the result is that whatever we built in the 50s and 60s, not just the bridges and overpasses, but also the underground infrastructure and other facilities that we constructed, did not have the same quality control that we would like. And the result is that these were open to aggressive environment, and as a consequence, they have deteriorated.
You've talked about these problems that we've inherited, and they are problems from the 1950s and 1960s, when basically there was a rush to build, and you've suggested that the designs and structures that were used as well were not optimum. Is that your view?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
How can we do better?
Well, I think these days we have the knowledge to do things better. You know, first of all, let's say if I'm asked to look at a bridge across the St. Lawrence River, I might not build anything like the Jacques Cartier or the Champlain Bridge or the Victoria Bridge these days. I would use a cable-stayed bridge, of course, Papineau Bridge is an older version, but this will be with several cables. And that will be the most economical solution. At the same time, it could be constructed in such a way that the permeability of the concrete deck would be minimal, protective measures could be taken, and this way we can have a bridge for 100 years, 150 years or more.
Do we need new bridges?
You know, I think that is a question that needs to be answered with the total needs of the society in mind. I've often said that in the 50s and 60s, especially in the 60s when we knew that we were getting Expo 67 and we built highways as if they were going out of style. If at that time we had stopped and said, look, what are the needs of Montreal going to be, or the greater Montreal area going to be in the year 2000 or 2020? If we had looked 50, 60 years ahead and just asked ourselves, what kind of city do we want? Do we want a city that emphasizes the automobile, or a city that would sort of emphasize mass transit? We could have a very different city. For example, we were building the metro system at that time. If you had taken to the east, to the west, to the north, to Laval, through Laval, further out, into the South Shore, instead of building bridges, instead of building highways and bridges, we would have been better off.
Now, this has been an argument in Montreal right now, especially with the Turco, and basically the automobile and the question of mass transit. Critics of the present Turco have said that basically the officials and planners at the Ministry of Transport are stuck in the 1950s, that they're recreating the very thing you've described. Is that your view?
Yes. I think they should wake up. I think instead of throwing billions of dollars on doing the same thing over and over again, I think it's about time we started thinking about what kind of Montreal do we want in the year 2060, 2070. What kind of Montreal would our children and grandchildren inherit? What kind of environment would they have? And if we still continue with the hundreds of thousands of cars every day, yes, we'll get pollution. So it's not just technical solutions, we also have to look at the environmental aspects of life here in Montreal, social aspects of life here in Montreal, what is happening to us, and as a consequence of all of these, we have to look at the total quality of life that you and I enjoy. I think we just need to be more rigorous. You know, I think we have the tools available. For example, to find out the remaining thickness of a plate. It can be done easily these days, there's no problem. If, for example, if a concrete on a bridge deck is delaminated, we can easily find, we've got the tools for that without stopping the traffic. You know, we've got the tools for it, and the question is just to use these tools intelligently to be able to reach the end goal that, you know, we want to find out what is the state of health of the bridge.
Does that require political will, basically political figures from above, making sure that the technocracy does what it's supposed to do, and giving the experts the money that they need to do the job?
Absolutely, because many of our problems in Quebec have basically arisen from the fact that you know, during the times of financial crises, maintenance was deferred on these bridges. That's a respectful word of saying we won't maintain it. But you know, I believe that we cannot follow that old philosophy of design, build and forget. What we need to do is design and build for the entire service life and ensure that the system will be maintained properly over its entire service life. My own philosophy is, if you don't want to maintain it, do not build it. And that maintenance is very, very important, and therefore the politicians have a key role here. And I would like to, I have proposed a few times that you know, we should have a national infrastructure policy in Canada, which by extension to Quebec also, where every owner must ensure that maintenance is never deferred.
Is there anything that you've sort of felt as you've looked back over this very interesting period actually in North American history here in Quebec? Do you have a kind of tentative conclusion.
Yes, I do. You know, I think I have a very strong recommendation for my own profession. I'm a civil engineer, and I'd like to see that we design our infrastructure for the total life cycle performance, not just to build it at the lowest cost as we do right now. And if we continue to build at the lowest cost, we'll get these problems like the Champlain Bridge or other infrastructure that has deteriorated tremendously. But if we design and build for life cycle performance and life cycle costs, so a few additional dollars spent now would save millions of dollars later on. And this is where it's penny wise and pound foolish, as they say. So investment initially in sound infrastructure would pay off for the society later on.
Now you said two things. Think in terms of long life cycles of structures. Think in terms of the life cycles of your children and grandchildren. Are you calling for a change of thinking here among specialists and among leaders?
Yes, I think there has to be a paradigm shift here. We have got to change completely if we really want to survive. Otherwise, our infrastructure would continue to deteriorate. And if you just see what has happened in Montreal over the past 2 or 3 weeks, if this persists, we would be living in a city where you would need hours to move from point A to point B. Of course, that will reduce our productivity, number one. That will reduce our competitiveness nationally, and that of Canada internationally. And finally, I think the kind of life that we have enjoyed so far, the quality of life would decrease considerably. And I don't think that any Montrealer would like any of those things to happen.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.